Welcome back, biologists. We're almost done with this semester. But let's talk about how plants respond to their environment. One very, very important factor in a plant's environment is sunlight. It allows a plant to obtain energy to perform photosynthesis and really is what keeps the plant and all of Earth alive, right? So plants have phytochromes. Phytochromes are pigments in a plant that regulate how a plant will respond to light. This includes seed germination and the avoidance of shade. So a plant is going to try to bend towards where light is available and avoid putting its leaves in the shade. It also includes things like at daytime, when the sun is overhead, this leaf has its plants up and parallel to the sun so that it can absorb that light. At midnight, the leaves kind of go down, they relax. Not only these bigger leaves, but also these smaller leaves at top, because they're not performing photosynthesis. They don't need to be facing towards anything at that point. Here's phototropism in a mung bean. You'll actually be able to see the leaves on this plant move to face the light. Plants can also have circadian rhythms. We have discussed circadian rhythms a little bit in terms of plants, and we've discussed them in terms of animals. These are cycles that are internal, just built into a plant cell. They last about 24 hours long. There are phytochromes that will mark sunrise and sunset that provide biological a clock to kind of help keep that circadian rhythm on time. However, just as you know that if you were to travel to a different time zone, your body would reset that circadian rhythm. Plants can also reset their circadian rhythms to follow along with the sunrise and sunset wherever they are. There's also some things that are not controlled by any environmental variable that just seem to be on this 24-hour schedule. Those would be things like opening and closing their stomata, producing photosynthetic enzymes, and movements associated with sleep. And these are all controlled by this internal clock. Although in the lack of sunrise, that clock can kind of adjust itself somewhere between like 21 and 27 hours long. So those phytochromes interacting with sunlight, it's really important to keep them on the correct clock for where the plant is located. A photoperiod refers to how long the night and day are relative to each other. This is an environmental stimulus that plants use to be able to tell what time of year it is. So it helps ensure that plants bloom in the proper season. So this plant can tell the day is getting shorter, it's time to bloom. This plant can tell the day is getting longer, it's time to bloom. But something that's interesting is it's not just the amount of daylight or the amount of darkness. It actually needs to be that much darkness in a row. So here you have just a little break in light. So a couple of hours of darkness, then a break with some light, and a couple of hours of darkness. That plant acts like it only had that short amount of darkness. So it acts by how long of darkness it had with a break. Here, this long day plant, you could trigger it to bloom by just flashing some light in it. Even just, a second or two of light is enough to trigger that plant to say, oh, light, I only have this shorter hour of darkness. I don't have a long night anymore. It's time to bloom. Photoperiodism is this physiological response to a photoperiod. So that's what this means in this caption where it says photoperiodism, is how long that plant needs to respond to its photoperiod. So there are some plants that are short day plants, some that are long day plants, and some that are day neutral plants. So short day plants will bloom when the light periods begin to shorten. Daylight is shorter, nighttime gets longer. So they'll flower during the late summer or fall. These will be things like chrysanthemums and poinsettias. Long day plants will bloom in the late spring or early summer when light periods lengthen. Things like spinach and lettuce and cereal grains. So short day plants have the day length or less, right? So that they have a maximum period of sunlight that it has to be that much sunlight or less for them to grow. Long day plants have kind of a minimum amount of sunlight, and it has to be longer than that. Or if we're looking in terms of night, long day plants have a maximum number of darkness, and if the darkness is longer than that, they won't bloom. But if the darkness is shorter than that, they will bloom. Short day plants have a minimum amount of darkness that will trigger them to bloom, and if the darkness is shorter than that, they won't bloom. There are also day neutral plants that are unaffected by photoperiod. They start growing, and once they're big enough and mature enough, they bloom. They don't care how much sunlight is there or not. All right, so now you can tell me if an enzyme in a field-grown soybean leaves is most active at noon and least active at midnight, is its activity under circadian rhythm? If a plant flowers in a controlled chamber with a daily cycle of 10 hours of light and 14 hours of darkness, is it a short day plant? Next, let's talk about gravitropism. This is a plant's response to gravity. So if you plant a seed, its roots will grow down. It has positive gravitropism. And its shoots will grow up. It has negative tropism. They will grow like that. You won't have roots growing up or shoots growing down unless there's some mutation with this plant. One possibility for how plants are detecting gravity is an organelle called statoliths. These are a very dense, heavy type of organelle or plastid inside the starch grains that may just be able to move down in response to gravity to trigger that cell to know which way is down or up. However, plants that don't have statoliths also are able to show gravitropism. So this whole mechanism isn't quite entirely figured out at this point. Thigmotropism is a plant's response to touch or mechanical disturbances. So thigmomorphogenesis, touch, shape, change. So changes in the form that result from mechanical disturbance. So this would be something like trees in a windy environment will be shorter and stockier than that exact same species of tree grown in a more sheltered location. That's an example of thigmomorphogenesis. Here are two plants. This plant on the leaf on the left was touched a lot. Every day it got touched twice. And it grew a lot shorter than this plant on the left, than this plant on the right, which is not touched. That's thigmomorphogenesis. Thigmotropism is growth in response to touch. So this occurs in vines and climbing plants. They'll grow straight until they touch something, and then that touching it triggers them to start vining around and climbing around something. Rapid leaf movements in response to a mechanical stimulation would be an example of a transmission of an action potential in that plant. Here's thigmotropism in mimosa leaves, so you can watch as they get touched, how they respond to that touch. That's thigmotropism. And that's thigmotropism. All right, so some questions for you. 1, a greenhouse worker finds that potted chrysanthemums nearest the aisles are often shorter than those in the middle of the bench. Explain this edge effect, a common problem in horticulture. And then what if a seed were placed upside down at planting, would the plant be able to develop normally? Explain. All right, one more lecture video, and that's it for this semester. I'll see you back for our final little video. Bye.